Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much, Jake. So, as Jake mentioned, I'm working for Silverpop as a product advisor out of the UK. We recently acquired by IBM, so that's all sort of taking part into what we're talking about today. So, let me just get the presentation open for you all. Perfect. So the topic of today's is thriving in a customer-driven world. So I guess the first thing I want to come out with is kind of a bold statement, but we as marketers tend to market blind. We're using sort of big data and not really sort of drilling down in the way we should. And the problem in a nutshell is that marketing practice tends to be 10 years behind the vision. We've got technology. We've got all of the resources we need to actually put all this forth, but unfortunately we tend to sit a little bit behind. As far as 10 years, as far as sort of we're concerned, you're still seeing some companies out there batch and blast, and many of us sort of segmenting into small pots. So I guess what is it that holds us back? So we've identified really that it's three areas that are holding us back. Firstly, our tactics, just as I mentioned there, really... 10 years behind. We're training our teams, and because we've got limited resources, we're only going out and, using the tactics that we've learned rather than sort of leveraging the technology that's available, going out there to learn what technology's out there that we can use. We're just relying on what we know, what's easy, and we pass that downstream to our teams. And again, just flowing straight into technology. All of our data tends to be held in silos, so we've got all of these different channels where we're collecting data, but unfortunately, when they're all separate, we're not really getting that single customer view. All we're getting is, great information from over here and from over here, but we're not connecting to see if there's something, a bigger message that's being brought to us across. And ultimately, the customer touch. So, the limitations we've got with the first two are ultimately resulting in us not giving our customers the best experience possible. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of our customers for a moment. So what is it as customers we expect from brands, whatever they are? First of all, relevant information. There's so much out there that we can, that we have to digest on a daily basis. So many ads, so many emails, so much communication. We don't want to waste our customers' time. We need to be relevant with all of our communication, which is really, really difficult when we're trying sort of the batch and blast approach. The mom and pop experience. So again, how do we want to be treated as customers? We like it when we go into a shop and, someone does sort of take the time to get to know us. So if we go into a restaurant, if they come up, they, recommend, they ask, and that way we get a better experience, we get what we want. And then finally, the connection to the brand. So, ultimately by doing the first two things, that's what we end up getting. So, best friend brands, you've probably heard of that concept. And ultimately, that's exactly, sort of where we need to be. So I want to tell you a little story. So, and it's very, very twee, I'm sorry. But we've got Bob here, and Bob runs a local sandwich shop in my town. How's this relevant to gaming and everything that's going on around us today? Well, it's Bob's customers, really, that make him special. So what is it about Bob's customers that differentiate him from everyone else? Well, first of all, Bob's customers spend 5 times more with him than they do with his competitors. He's just a local sandwich shop owner, that's it. It's nothing special. He's not a Subway, he's not a Pret. But they spend 5 times more with him than any of the competitors in the local town. They spend more than they intended to when they walk in. They intend to walk in and buy a sandwich. They walk out with a whole lot more. They've bought a whole meal. They spend a whole lot more. But the key point is the third point here. They love Bob. They're really happy to do this. They spend more than they would with the competitors. They spend more than they intend. They still walk out happy. I mean, that's kind of strange concept to think about when you think spending more money equals a more happy customer, but that's the truth of the matter. They get an experience with that shop owner that they don't get with the larger brands. So why is it? What is it about Bob and that sandwich shop that gives him a better experience? What is it that gives his customers something different that make them want to do that? And the fact is, Bob knows everything about his customers. That's why he can give that personal experience to each and every one of them, and they're more than happy to spend that money. They're more than happy to walk out with more than they intended. So let's put ourselves in our shoes for a moment. So we're all these, that's why I wore the grey suit today. We're all traditional marketers, and generally when we send a message out, we do so kind of an impersonal way. We might use some simple personalisation on our emails and our messages, but ultimately we're just saying to our customers, hi there, this is what we do. Do you want it? And we might offer them a simple choice. We don't really speak to them as individuals. We speak to them as a brand with what we're trying to push. Whereas Bob, he's a little bit more personal. He knows my name. He knows the sandwich that I had last time. He can make recommendations based on what I've bought in the past, what I've told him I like and what I don't like. So that's, really how the difference between the two is. One is just shouting a message that's overarching, overbearing, and the other one is a very personal, tailored experience. And ultimately, the more like Bob we can be as marketers, the more money we'll make. So, again, being very, very twee, but today marketing is totally unpopular. We're definitely like the grey suits. We're moving away from that and we are being a bit more personal, but we're certainly not at that place like Bob where we can be personal with every single customer. So that's our challenge. And I think you guys would say, well, okay, yeah, it's a big challenge for quite an obvious reason. Bob's only got 100 customers that walk through the door. He sees every single one of them. It's very easy for him to dialogue, to get to know them, to remember their orders. It's not that difficult. There's only 100 people. But you guys probably have thousands, if not millions of customers. So how is that possible for you to interact with them when you don't see them coming through the door every day? I mean, some of them you will have brick and mortar stores, but ultimately most of the communication will be digital. So, digitally, how do we talk to those customers as individuals just like Bob here? Well, the truth is, we are in a good place in terms of technology. So if we look in the past, we used to just be broadcasting batch and blast, and that's how we did it. We just got a database together, we sent a message out to everyone, we hope for the best. Over time, we have started to move away from broadcasting and into sort of the targeting and segmenting area where we're getting sort of buckets of data together and sending out to those users. But ultimately, the opportunity lies in us being personal with every single customer, and the technology is there for us to do this. So you might recognise some of these simple audience segments, and you guys have probably done some similar to these. So where we're looking at, a female that's aged between 18 and 30, certainly I am anyway, and then we've got, people, whether they've wagered with you, whether they've deposited, whether they're a free player, all of these sort of buckets I'm sure that we've all sorted our customers into in the past and probably continually do so. And that's exactly the problem. Before we were batch and blast, and now we're segmenting to these rather large, kind of widespread buckets. But the truth is, if we want to get more like Bob, we want to get more personal, we need to make these buckets smaller and smaller. So it's not going to happen in a day. We do need to sort of scale down, but ultimately we need to make the audiences smaller, therefore making each communication more relevant to our individuals. Ultimately, our goal is to have segments of one. Every single person on our database should be considered a segment. And that's really where sort of Silverpop come in, and that's where we're sort of trying to pioneer and push forward. We really do believe that we need to provide relevant experience to have intelligent communication with each of our customers. And ultimately, that's how we get to being popular. So, just to reiterate, we need to use the individual information we collect about each customer to have an intelligent, relevant interaction. Again, intelligent and relevant, they're both really important. If we're not relevant to our customers, they're just going to disregard the message we're sending. So again, today more than ever, with so much else going into inboxes, to phones, to social, we need to be relevant. If not, the communication is just simply not going to work. So getting to the point of how do we do this? Behavioural marketing automation, and if any of you are familiar with Silverpop or IBM, you're going to have heard of this term. And it's really composed of three elements: behaviour, automation, and real-time messaging. So ultimately, where the rest of this presentation will be going, we'll be talking about behaviour and then how we can leverage that. So, we're collecting behaviours that we're probably not even aware of. As customers, we're exhibiting behaviour that we're giving to companies, and they're not even really sort of aware. We're not aware that we're giving them. We can use these behaviours and then automate messaging off the back of them. So if someone exhibits a behaviour, automate a message out to that customer to try and entice them to be relevant. And ultimately, if we can do it in real time, if we know when they're engaging with our brand, they're doing something on the site, they're exhibiting a behaviour, we can trigger a real-time message to help their customer experience. So in a nutshell, behavioural marketing, use what you know about your customer to meet their needs. Ultimately, to drive your messaging cadence. So the goal for us is to talk to each of our customers as an individual. So back to our story with Bob and how we're as traditional marketers marketing today. So I'm probably a little bit harsh when I've said, okay, we're all doing batch and blast, and maybe some of us are doing some segmentation. Truth is, most companies now are doing some form of segmentation. It's just, are we doing it the right way? So how are most marketers today segmenting their data? And I'm sure that many of you will be able to identify with this, but we do it in two ways generally. By profile data, so gender, age, location, simple demographic information like that. And then we're getting a little bit better moving on and using preferences as well. So many of you may have preference centres where we're asking simple choices, giving simple choices to our customers and saying, do you want an email or, do you want HTML or do you want text? Email or SMS? Do you want to receive casino mails or do you want to receive sportsbook? Those simple choices like that. And that's great. I think that is us moving on. That is progress, and that's moving us along that curve I showed you earlier of, away from broadcast and towards personalisation. But it's not the best way. The best way is by using their behaviour, what they're doing. So, for example, one of your preference centres, I could go in and tell you that I'm interested in casino offers. And maybe I am, and I play a few, I read a few emails, and then over time, my tastes change. So suddenly, if you're sending me a message every week, and I'm opening here and there, but then every week I'm clicking on the sportsbook option that you've got on the navigation bar, and then starting to play sportsbook games because my tastes have changed. I've suddenly got into a new sport or something along those lines. Then you would argue that my implicit behaviour of me playing those sportsbook games rather than casino, my tastes have changed, but that's not actually reflected in the profile data that you collected or the preference data that you collected on me. So ultimately, is that data that I gave you, say, a year ago, 2 years ago, still relevant? Probably not. It's the behaviours I'm exhibiting that could support or contrast what I've told you in the past. So, for example, we could take that exact example and then say, well, OK, we've noticed that his tastes have changed. Let's ask him to refill out this to make sure we're sending you relevant communication, something along those lines. And again, I think as traditional marketers, we think about the big data, we think about those buckets. We don't actually think about actionable data that we have on each individual customer. We just think about the demographics and the preferences. But we do have this behavioural data, as I mentioned earlier in the session. It's absolutely everywhere. So you'll see a whole host of them here, and you'll recognise some, if not all, of these behaviours. Some of you might already be using some of them. I would imagine that the deposit data is being used here and there. But ultimately, I don't think we're using enough of these, because if someone's exhibiting these behaviours and we can capture them, then ultimately we can market based off the back. And not only to increase our revenue, but to improve the customer experience, which is ultimately what will keep someone coming back to your brand over and over. So in order to start leveraging this, we've got to shift our thinking, because at the moment we're still thinking that 10 years behind. We're still using marketing tactics that are segmented into big buckets. So you don't have to go straight out of the gate, go for the jugular, as it were, with a whole host of behavioural automations that are going to take you a while to plan, structure and set up. You could just start simple. You'd be amazed at how many brands are not sending simple welcome emails based off of behaviour of simply signing up. It's absolutely amazing. One simple welcome email to say, thanks very much, you're all registered, everything's okay, and here's some useful information. I mean, even better than that, a welcome series, a series of messages that gradually eases someone into their new subscription or the new brand that they're engaging with. And I think that seamlessly flows into a nurture campaign as well. If you can identify some simple behaviours that people exhibit when they first purchase, then you can start to encourage people and nurture them towards those behaviours, ultimately so you can get them to become a paid customer or repeat customer if they've only played once off the back of an incentive. And then finally we have something simple like abandonment. So if someone's downloaded a piece of your software but have yet to play, you could say, okay, great, we've got a record that you downloaded our software on X date, but you've yet to use your free spins, you've yet to deposit. And ultimately, something like that is a very simple, behaviour just to leverage. So you don't need to start, going for every single behaviour on the chart I showed before, but more so thinking about, simple ones where you can start off. And ultimately, it's about rising above the noise. So I mentioned earlier in the session about, so many different channels that you're competing with. Every single, brand in this room are likely competing against each other, for space in the inbox, for people to pay attention to that particular message. And you're not only competing against that, you're competing against social, other people's emails, all of this different type of communication. So in terms of marketing emails. I mean, hands up. I mean, how many of you have a separate inbox for marketing communication from your regular communication? No, none of you. I do. There certainly are people out there that will actively go out of their way to put things in a different box, and Gmail have done this as well. I mean, Gmail have the tab functionality to separate out social communication from your regular communication from commercial. So how do we rise above this noise? Well, I mentioned before that I had that email account where I just collect marketing emails, and I went in there and I received about 400 emails in about 2-3 weeks. So I just check in periodically to see what's there. And I opened about 3 or 4 of those emails. And when I was doing that, I noticed something strange about sort of the messages that I opened, and I want to show a couple of them to you now. So I ordered a new SIM card from O2's, my mobile provider. And as soon as I'd done that, I received a message instantaneously telling me, you've ordered it, everything's cool, and giving me a little bit of information about what I need to do when it comes. Great, nice bit of communication, nice and reassuring. And they followed that up a couple of days later just to tell me that SIM card was in the post. Again, nice and simple, a behaviour at their end, so they'd recognised it had been put in the post, which had triggered a message to me. Again, just reassuring, not particularly crucial, but just a nice thing in the customer experience so I could know when to expect my SIM card to come through, which it did. And then I did nothing. I just completely forgot about it. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll put that in the phone at the weekend. I'll sort it out then. Well, just before the weekend approaches, I received a final message that was encouraging me to top up. And it doesn't seem anything special. It looks exactly like the second message, so it could certainly have been approved upon. But they've offered me a nice incentive there, about £20 credit, when I top up. Now, if I'd topped up, it wouldn't have made any sense. What these 3 messages have in common is they've all been powered by automation and using behaviour. So the first one being the behaviour of me submitting that request to get that SIM card. The second one being that it's a behaviour at their end. They put it in the post. They're alerting me of something that they've done when I can expect it. And then finally, they've recognised the fact that I should have received the SIM card, but I haven't yet topped it up. So they're triggering messaging with an incentive now to encourage me to do this. So again, that's sort of the 3 messages there. The thing they all had in common was the automation. They're the 3 of the very few that I picked out of those 300 messages to read. Everything else to me was just noise. I've scanned over the subject lines, and some of those brands I like, some of those I might have been slightly interested in, but it's these ones that were relevant and timely that really stuck out to me, and they're the reasons I opened them. And not only that, I guess, the other thing that's important, when we're talking about making, working off of behaviours and automation is the right message, the right medium. So often we'll offer an email that's using responsive design, and it's great. But as soon as I click through to the website, it's all over the place. It's not responsive. So we need to have a consistent journey and make sure that we're communicating with our customers in the medium that they expect. So responsive design on both websites and on, for apps and for emails themselves, more relevant and more important than it's ever been. So there's a simple equation, I guess, for what I consider the perfect customer experience, and that's behaviour, profile data, real-time rules equals a perfect customer experience. Those 3 elements together should give you what you need to be personal and relevant to your customers. And ultimately, that's exactly what Bob does in a completely different capacity, but he knows his customers' behaviour. He recognises what they've purchased in the past. He knows who they are. He knows their details because he has conversations with them. And real time, they walk into his shop. he has that direct communication, but it's no different for us doing that digitally. So I guess there's 5 questions that we need to ask ourselves as marketers. And the first one is, what behaviours matter most? So let's say we're starting on this journey today. It's going to be kind of hard. There's so many behaviours out there. Which ones matter the most? And the truth is, we can't tell you that. But you guys work with your brands, your business. You know your customers better than anyone else. So go with your hunches. You've got to start somewhere. So again, go with a hunch. Start somewhere and move on from that. I mean, the truth is, you could sit there and there's so many different channels. There's so many different behaviours that you could think about leveraging. And the truth is, again, you're not going to be able to do it all to begin with. You might have already been leveraging some, so like deposit data, for example, but you're probably not going a little bit deeper in that, looking into deposit recency combined with other behaviours. So what we'd say is, suggest where you start is to take a look at all of your different channels and then just have a brainstorming session where you sit there and you think about, the main behaviours for each of the channels you've got, and then try and highlight as a group the ones that you've got a hunch would make the most difference. And I think it's important to realise that you need to focus on behaviours that move your customer forward. Not so much ones that are going to drive you revenue instantly, but the ones that provide the best customer experience. Because ultimately, if I buy a gift for my little cousin, my behaviour tells you, okay, I've purchased that, maybe you can make a recommendation. But ultimately, I'm not going to buy that gift again until perhaps next year. So again, think about ones, rather than driving revenue and always pushing that, think of ones that, that are going to help your customer move forward and improve their experience rather than just focusing on return on investment. So the second question we have is, how do we capture and learn this data? And with tons of different channels, I guess it's really difficult, but ultimately with one single database to collect all of this information from all channels. Because ultimately, if we're only seeing, say, these 3 here, we're only getting part of the story. So we need to make sure that ultimately, in the end, to provide the perfect customer experience, that we have all of these channels feeding into one single database where we can leverage that information. Because we don't know, if we have all of the channels in one place, feed into one place, and one that's missing, that might be the one channel that's telling us the most about that particular customer. For most, it might not be the case. You've probably selected the channels you need to focus on strategically, but ultimately, if there's one that doesn't feed into that, that might be the one that's telling us the most. So for those customers where that is important channel, we're not actually getting the full story for them and missing out on actions that we can leverage. So moving on from there is, how do we turn that insight into action? And there's really 4 elements to this. Rules. A simple set of rules to build on. So if someone exhibits behaviour A, do this. If they exhibit behaviour B, do this. And that's the foundation on which we can build. We can tweak and change as we go along, but that's the foundation upon which everything will work. Then we move into scoring models, which I'm sure many of you use or have been exposed to, especially if you come from a B2B background. But ultimately, when it comes to scoring, we're just looking at whether a customer is engaged with us or not, and the recency of that engagement. So, and scoring based off of that, and we can look at propensity to buy, propensity to lapse, or a whole host of different actions. And then we move into automation, which is really crucial for this being able to scale, because ultimately, we don't have endless resources when it comes to staff and putting those emails together. If we were looking to message to every individual a single message, and you've got 1 million customers, then that's 1 million emails you'd have to build in a day. It's not viable. So automating a lot of that communication is absolutely critical. And then finally, enriching that experience with smart content. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the concept of dynamic content. So if a customer exhibits behaviour A, show them this content. If they show another behaviour or have a certain combination of demographics, preference data and behaviours, show them this. And you can work that alongside the automation. So you can automate based on a certain behaviour, and then within that message itself, update everything based on other behaviours and demographic information to make that message even more relevant to that target audience. So going back to the point I made before, where it's really important about focus on what the customer wants to buy from you not just what they want, not what you want to sell. Again, it's all about customer engagement, making them a lifetime customer or a long-term customer, increasing that lifetime value rather than just saying, here's what we want to sell this week, and going on from there. So I asked the question before, how do we do this at scale? And before, it was all about the marketing plan. It's a calendar of events. So we know on Monday we send out our casino newsletter. On Tuesday we do our sports book. On Wednesday we do our special offers. Very structured. And to a certain extent, there's nothing wrong with that, especially if we're combining that with things like dynamic content to make the messages a little bit more personal. But to really do this at scale, it's all about the customer and the behaviours they exhibit. So, again, going back to automation, making sure that every behaviour they exhibit, we can target them based on that. And then using other features, such as send time optimization, which is an algorithm that learns about a particular customer and says, okay, when are they most likely to open a piece of communication? And then it learns from that, and then actually, when you click the send button, it'll send to them at the time they're most likely to open, or the day they're most likely to open, rather than just saying, we send it at 11 on a Wednesday, and that's when they receive it. So, again, it's all about sort of testing, learning, and updating your automations using those behaviours. How do you do it across channels? Well, it goes back to that single database, but ultimately what the single database will provide us with is a single identity for each customer. So we know that we've got all of these channels feeding into one particular database, and that gives us a fully rounded view of one individual customer. So therefore, we can make a best judgment based on the behaviour she's exhibited through all channels about how to approach her next. So again, for Jane, we've got social. We know she uses mobile and desktop. We know she uses email. So we can then go forth from there and provide her with a rich experience. So I guess if you go away from today, they're the 5 questions that I'd be asking yourselves, if you wanted to move to this segment of 1. Because it's only by asking these questions and starting on that journey where you can really achieve sort of, individualised messaging that's relevant. And ultimately, that's all behavioural marketing is, and it kind of looks like that sandwich shop owner there. So, just to round us off, how do we get from where we are now to, where we want to be? And I think I mentioned before, it's small steps. You might be part way through this journey and you're already segmenting into buckets. It's really now going in and drilling down into the behaviours you're capturing, or behaviours that are being exhibited, but perhaps you're not capturing yet and you should be. On the website, people are exhibiting behaviours every day. They're visiting this link, they're downloading this, they're watching this, all telling us something, but we're probably not capturing that information and therefore not able to leverage it. So all I'd suggest is that you start small, start with some simple behaviours you think are going to make a difference, and then moving on from beyond there. Our clients are Bobular, and this is where we get into the horrible salesy spiel bit of the presentation, but we've got 5,000 customers at Silverpop with across many different verticals. Many brands you'll notice there, but from big and small. And many of the peers and many of you here today are already working with us. So, our teams internally are all set up to help sort of assist you to that segment of 1 and to help you get there. So I won't bore you too much with sort of what we do, but we are a digital marketing platform that, collates all of this. So we can be that single, help you achieve that single customer view. Previously we're known just as a simple email service provider, but that's not really where we are now. We're more a digital marketing platform that collates all of these channels into one, including personalised web experiences. So we've talked about dynamic content and how we can personalise that experience on email. We can also do the same thing on the web. We can integrate all of that technology into the web, so when someone revisits the site and it recognises who I am, my behaviours, it can populate different content based on the customer experience that I need to have. Brings in mobile, so it's advancements that we've been making in the last couple of years. And then finally, the system that pulls it all together. So ultimately, that's where Silverpop sits now, and ultimately, we've got teams set up to help sort of move you on, so feel free to come over and have a conversation a little later on. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions.
Thanks a lot, David. Yeah. Anyone got questions?
I have one. I assume that Bob makes good burgers as well?
He makes good burgers. I've never tried.
But what if I'm only interested in eating the burgers and don't want to get personalized with Bob?
if there's people that don't want to get personalised with
because
Bob.
I just want to have the good burgers, and I get annoyed every time Bob talks to me.
Sure. Well, it's one of those things where, if you sign up to a brand, what would you rather have? So you're going to receive. So by signing up to a particular email, I mean, there's always the option to unsubscribe, to opt out. But ultimately, if I'm sending you a message because you've opted into a particular piece of communication and you choose not to opt out, then I'm going to send you communication regardless. So what would you rather have? The question for you, I guess, is would you rather have the communication that's just standard that everyone gets, or would you rather have something that's somewhat relevant to you based on your purchase habits and your behaviours?
But my question is, in the root is, what if you have customers do not want to get personalized with you, but just want to use your product?
Just want to say, well...
So they don't want you to know that you're a customer. I don't want my supermarket lady to know about my shopping list every time I visit and say, last time you bought toilet paper.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, I think that's sort of part of where we are in the industry now, so it's almost dangerous for us to know these behaviours. But the fact is we're exhibiting them, and whether we like it or not, this is being tracked. It can be tracked. So ultimately, again, the idea of it is not, for reputable companies, is not to provide, not for malice and not for, any nefarious means. It's simply to provide that better customer experience. So whilst I see your point, ultimately I think it boils down to the fact that information is being captured regardless of whether we want it to be or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I have one more question about different generations have different needs for the communication.
Mm-hmm.
Like the we generation have different needs, have it socially approved, and there's X generation has more. Like there's different generation types. And how do you think that you guys scale between communication of different generations? It seems like a one way of doing things, and not really taking those age groups and the way into a matter. So
sure.
Yep.
Well, I mean, you can apply. So, thank you for the question anyway. So, you can apply, demographics and preference data along with behaviours. So, you don't need to simply just say behaviour is the be-all and end-all. There's still going to be relevance in that demographic data in terms of analysis and actual practicality. So there's going to be uses for both. So it's really a combination of all of that. So it's going back and A/B testing things. So if you specify, okay, we've got these different segments of age groups that we're working with or generations that we're working with at the moment, but then setting behaviours on top of those and then seeing how those perform against, using those same behaviours for other generations and seeing if the results are all very similar or whether they all are very different. And I guess that will give you the answer about whether the generations that you're working with historically have been relevant or not. And you might find exactly, we need to even go smaller than that. We need to look at smaller generation brackets, 5 years rather than 10 years. So it's only by testing and combining them where you'll really sort of get those answers. Thank you for the question.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, obviously the examples you've given, for example, O2, which is a major consumer brand, they've got technology, they've got human and technological resources to do all that, and to take out a contract with you guys, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of the guys in the audience are affiliates. They're not particularly big outfits. Where do they start? What are the limits? How do they also prioritize the data? Because it could be demographics for some, behavior for others. Where they are, location maybe. I mean, how do they, make their way through all these different points? The
mire of technology that's out there. So again, I think it's you need to have a stable platform to watch the work. I'd be remiss if I said that I work for Silverpop, for crying out loud. But you do need a stable platform that's going to be able to take that. For some of the smaller outfits, so you've started with the with the profile data. That is something, the segmentations, but you need to, again, it's simple behaviours. You can start really small. It can be every pretty much email supplier out there. Have they opened an email or not? Have they clicked an email or not? Something simple like that might be exactly where you need to begin. And if there's an email supplier out there that's not giving you that information, then I don't know what you're doing with them. But ultimately, sort of where you begin in terms of prioritising, I guess, demographic data versus behavioural data. So again, I think it's all going back to hunches. So I think everyone's going to be set in their ways, and it's going to be, these are the segments we market to. it's just selecting a behaviour and either testing that against or testing that within each segment, each demographic. And then you'll see, as I mentioned to the gentleman before, you'll see those results return, and it will sort of justify and bear out whether those demographics or whether that preference data was actually valuable in the first place. So hopefully that answers your questions.
I mean, essentially trial and error.
Trial and error, yeah, I think that's where we begin. Trial and error, working off hunches, which is not the most strategic way to go, I guess. But once we move away from sort of hunches, and we start to get some insight, we can use that insight to then power what we're going to do next. So as I mentioned, sort of a brainstorm session where we sit down, we think about all of these behaviours we could potentially use, and then we could check off, okay, we're a small guy, we're a smaller outfit, we don't have access to all of this right now, we don't have the resources or the money to go out and capture this, and we can start checking off, and it'll leave us a list of exactly what we can use, and then just working from that, and then the results from that, with any luck, should bear out the justification to say, okay, maybe we do need to go back to the board and say, here's the results, they're hard to argue with, we need to invest in a platform or technology that's actually going to help us push forward so we can leverage more of these behaviours that we've identified.
Okay, we're running slightly over, and there's a special on coffee break, so are there any questions to finish off the session? No? Okay, well, a big round of applause for David. Thank you very much, David. It's really
Thanks,
interesting.
everyone.